A young woman is betrayed by her lover and abandoned by her family the moment they learn she's pregnant. Alone in a strange city, she vows to raise her child no matter the cost. Years later, as her son becomes a millionaire, love comes knocking. But is it true love, or a trap disguised in beauty? A heart-pounding test of loyalty is about to unfold. In a small town nestled at the foot of the hills in southern Georgia, where every house had a white picket fence and everyone knew everyone else's business, lived a girl named Kelly Monroe. 19 years old, radiant like the first bloom of spring. Her eyes sparkled like morning dew, and her laughter rang clear as a dawn melody. The townsfolk often said Kelly is the sunshine of this dreary little town, but that sunshine dimmed one crisp autumn afternoon when Kelly stood trembling on her front porch, clutching a pregnancy test with 2 blazing red lines. Like a verdict etched in fire, she had once loved passionately. Frank Dawson, a senior in high school, had a smile that set her heart racing and a promise, "I'll always be by your side," that she'd believed like gospel. They had dreamed of a little house, of curly-haired children and a lavender garden by the door, but when Kelly gently placed a hand on her stomach and smiled, saying, "I'm carrying a part of us," Frank's eyes went dark. His smile dissolved like smoke, and he uttered just 4 words, "I'm not ready." He wasn't ready. But she couldn't turn back. When Kelly told her parents, clinging to a fragile hope that her love might be forgiven, she met only her father's icy glare. "You've disgraced this family." Her mother, who used to brush Kelly's hair every night, now stood silent, hands gripping her apron, saying nothing. That silence cut deeper than any reprimand. 3 days later, Kelly was cast out of her home. A small bag, a few clothes, and some savings she'd kept in a childhood music box. That was all she took with her. Kelly left the town at dawn. The streets she'd once skipped along as a child now felt foreign. The people who used to greet her with smiles now shook their heads, whispering behind her back, "Ruined girl, who'd marry someone like that?" She didn't cry. Not because she was strong, but because her tears had dried up the first night she heard her father call her a disgrace. An old bus carried her away from the place she'd once called home. She didn't know her destination, only that wherever it was, anywhere, no one would know her as Kelly Monroe, the 19-year-old pregnant girl abandoned by both her lover and her family. On the bus, she cradled her belly and whispered, "Don't be afraid, little one. I won't abandon you like they abandoned me." The small city where she stopped wasn't kind. No one would rent a room to a young girl with no guarantor. No one would hire a pregnant woman. She was turned away again and again, hearing the same refrain, "Sorry, we need someone strong." But Kelly didn't give up. She found a cramped room with a leaky roof and moldy walls. But at least it was a place to lie down and drink. She took any job she could find, washing dishes, scrubbing floors, selling trinkets at the flea market. Every spare penny went toward milk and diapers for the day she'd give birth. At night, when the world slept, Kelly rested her hand on her growing belly and told herself, "I'll be both your mother and your father." One day, after endless rejections, Kelly stood before a mirror, her face tanned from the sun, her hands rough and calloused, and barely recognized herself. Yet in her weary eyes, a spark still flickered, the spark of a mother who'd never been protected but swore to shield her child with everything she had left. Her story was just beginning, but in that moment her fate was sealed. Kelly would not let those who'd abandoned her win. The new city held no one waiting for Kelly. No open arms, no familiar voices, just unfamiliar streets, the smell of exhaust fumes, and eyes that passed over one another like a fleeting breeze. Cold, hurry. In this foreign land, Kelly was no one. No longer the Monroe family's daughter, no longer Frank's Kelly, just a pregnant girl, adrift in a world that didn't care. At first, she tried applying at a fast food joint. The manager glanced at her belly and shook his head. "We need someone who can carry heavy trays. You're not a fit." At the grocery store, they were more polite, were worried about the risks for a pregnant woman. The words varied, but the looks were the same, pitying, distant. There was no job and no miracle came. Kelly started taking the jobs others turned down, washing clothes for hire, scrubbing dishes in strangers' homes, cleaning bar restrooms in the early mornings before patrons arrived. Once, she fainted in a bathroom from exhaustion. But when she came to, her first words were, "My baby, is it okay?" By the 8th month, Kelly began talking to the child in her womb every night, not to lull it to sleep, but to keep herself sane. She told her baby everything: how much she earned that day, how many rejections she faced, and how she'd spotted a pair of pale blue baby shoes in a thrift shop. "Do you like them?" she whispered, hand on her belly, eyes brimming with tears. "If I can make $5 more tomorrow, I'll buy them for you." In her darkest moments, Kelly didn't cry because life had rejected her. She cried only because she wasn't sure she had the strength to bring her child into the world properly. Then, one stormy night, in a leaky rented room, Henry was born. No doctor, no one to hold her hand or cheer her on, just Kelly, alone, in agony, terrified and shivering with cold, pushing through labor, holding her breath to keep from screaming, afraid the neighbors might evict her for making noise. The baby cried. His wails pierced the dark night, tearing through the silence like a declaration. "I'm here, Mommy." Kelly pulled him to her chest, tiny, red, warm. She sobbed the first time in months, not from pain, but because she knew she still had something worth living for. She named him Henry, ruler of the home, because in her heart from that moment on, he was her world. The months that followed were a blur of rushed mornings, strained afternoons, and exhausted nights. Kelly carried Henry strapped to her chest, selling fruit at the market while humming to him in a voice like a breeze through branches. "Sleep, my love. Mommy's still here." She learned to do everything with one hand because the other was always holding Henry. Once someone sneered, "So young and already burdened." Kelly just bowed her head, clutching her son tighter. They didn't know this child was the reason she hadn't collapsed. Every night, after Henry fell asleep, Kelly sat by his makeshift crib, a cardboard box, and watched him for a long time. She whispered, "Little one, I can't promise you riches, but I promise you dignity. I can't promise you everything in the world, but I'll teach you to love, to stand up when you fall." Some nights, she lit an old candle and wrote journal entries for Henry. "You'll grow up without a father, but I won't let you lack a friend. You won't have everything, but I'll teach you to be kind." One day, while wrapping goods at the market, an older woman approached, gazed at Henry, and said softly, "That boy has the same resilient eyes as you." Kelly was taken aback. It had been ages since anyone complimented her. She smiled. For the first time in weeks, her eyes lit up with a spark. "It's not that he's like me. It's that he's the one teaching me to be resilient." 10 years passed like a stormy blink of an eye. Henry had grown up in his mother's arms like a green sprout pushing through rocky soil. He had deep eyes like hers and a gentle way of looking at people that left a lasting impression on anyone who met him. Every day after school, Henry would chatter to his mom about math problems, the strict but fair principal, and his friend, the Oscar, who sneakily slipped candy into his backpack. For Kelly, just seeing her son's pure smile was enough to melt away all her exhaustion. Until one afternoon, when Henry came home, unusually quiet. He set his backpack down and walked slowly into the kitchen, where Kelly was preparing a simple vegetable soup for dinner. She turned with a smile. "How was your day, my little man?" Henry didn't answer right away. He pulled out a chair, sat at the table, and clasped his hands together. Then, very softly, "Mom, I have a question." Kelly felt her breath catch. Her heart skipped a beat. "Do I have a dad?" The question rang out, like a wind chime in a winter night, fragile and chilling. Kelly froze. The wooden spoon in her hand trembled slightly, the simmering soup bubbling like the old memories stirring in her chest. She turned, her eyes meeting her son's wide, clear ones, eyes waiting for the truth. She pulled up a chair and sat beside Henry. Placing her hand over his, she took a deep breath, as if to gather everything she was about to say into one steady moment. You have a father, but he left our lives a long time ago. Henry tilted his head. Why? Kelly pressed her lips together, trying to keep her voice steady. When I found out I was pregnant with you, I was so happy I thought Frank, would be too, but he wasn't ready to be a father. He turned his back, walked away, and never once looked back. Henry felt her heart shatter, but she knew her son deserved the truth, not to harbor resentment, but to understand that from the moment he was born, he'd been a fighter. She gently stroked his hair. From that day, I promised I'd never let you lack love. I'd be both your mom and your dad, and you've helped me keep that promise. Henry nodded slightly, then suddenly hugged her tight. You're the best, Mom. I don't need anyone else. Kelly held him close for a long time, but she never imagined fate would soon orchestrate an unexpected reunion, as if to test whether those old wounds had truly healed. 3 days later, Kelly took Henry to the weekend market, a bustling place filled with loud vendors and the sweet scent of fruit. While picking out fabric for her small stall, she suddenly froze. A few steps away stood Frank. The same height, the same eyes that once made her weak, now with a few extra wrinkles of adulthood. He was laughing with someone, oblivious to the past he'd discarded, standing right behind him. Kelly gripped Henry's hand tightly, her heart raced. Frank, she called, just one word, enough to make the past turn around. Frank looked back, his eyes locking onto Kelly, then sliding down to Henry, standing by her side, his eyes eerily similar to Frank's own. Frank's face stiffened. Kelly took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. This is Henry, your son. Frank swallowed hard. Kelly, Then, like a man facing an inconvenience, he stepped back, his voice lowering. I have a family now. Please, don't mess things up. Kelly went numb, but she still spoke, each word cutting like a knife. He's your son, Frank. The least you could do is look at him once like a father. Frank shook his head, his gaze dodging hers. That's not my responsibility anymore. Please, don't show up in my life again. Then he turned and walked away, leaving the mother and son standing there, amid the crowded market, where Kelly felt abandoned all over again, this time in front of her son. That night, Kelly sat beside Henry. He didn't ask anything more, just leaned his head quietly on her shoulder. I don't need him, Henry whispered. You're my whole world, Mom. Kelly hugged him tightly, tears silently streaming down her face, soaking into Henry's hair. A part of her had cracked, but the rest, for her son, would never break. Time flowed on like an unyielding river. 10 years after the fateful encounter with the father who rejected him, Henry Monroe had grown into a man of strength and resolve. Not only had he graduated top of his class in information technology, but he was also the young founder of a startup thriving in the competitive heart of the city. From a child raised in the arms of a mother who'd been forsaken by the world, Henry had proven to life that being abandoned wasn't an end. It was a question mark. One he answered by rewriting his own story. And at 28, with his mature demeanor, deep gaze, and calm presence, he turned heads wherever he went. Then Jane Carter came into his life. Jane entered Henry's world like an unfamiliar breeze, beautiful, sharp, breathtakingly alluring. She was an up-and-coming fashion designer, often gracing magazine covers with her haughty elegance and dresses that inspired both admiration and wariness. They met at a charity gala, Henry as a guest speaker, Jane as a diamond-tier sponsor. She struck up a conversation first, confident, charming, skilled at flustering even a man as sharp as Henry. Within weeks of dating, Henry was swept into Jane's orbit like a sleepwalker. She brought him to lavish fashion shows and cocktail parties where everyone ordered wine by its French name. Jane was worldly, refined, and always made him feel like he was falling for someone unlike anyone else. But in a quieter corner of the city, Kelly, the mother who'd spent her life building a foundation for her son, began to sense something off. Henry spoke of Jane with uncontainable excitement. "She's incredible, Mom. Successful, strong, and not intimidated by my status." Kelly smiled, but a faint unease stirred within her. She'd heard those words before. From herself. At 19, when she still believed love only needed to be beautiful to be enough. One evening, as Henry stopped by for dinner, Kelly asked gently, "Has Jane ever come here?" "Not yet," Henry hesitated. "She's busy. A designer's schedule is always packed. But I'll bring her soon," Kelly nodded. The same kind smile, the same gentle eyes. But inside, something felt unsettled. It wasn't Jane's beauty or success that troubled her. It was that Jane seemed like someone stepping into a story with its ending already written, yet uninterested in reading the beginning. The following week, Henry proposed to Jane during a romantic dinner at his luxurious apartment. Scented candles, roses, fine wine, everything straight out of a movie. Jane teared up, saying yes without hesitation. They embraced under the golden glow of the lights, and Henry thought, "Finally, I have someone to share my world with." But when he shared the news with Kelly, for the first time in years, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. "About what? That she loves you? Or what you have?" Henry paused. He'd always thought himself smart enough to tell the real from the fake. But his mother's question conjured an image. Jane's eyes when she first stepped into his villa, scanning the expensive furnishings before settling on him. He shook his head, trying to dismiss it. "Don't worry, Mom. I know what I'm doing." Kelly smiled, then said gently, "If you're certain, then let me live with you for a while. But as a maid, I won't be Kelly, I'll be Ellie. And if Jane is truly good, she won't need to know who I am to treat me kindly." Henry was stunned. "Mom, what are you?" "Same. I just want to be sure. The person you marry will be with you for life. If she's good enough, I'll be the first to bless you. But if not," Kelly didn't need to finish. Henry looked at his mother, then at the ring in his hand, and understood. Sometimes the heart needs to be tested to ensure it's beating for the right person. 3 days after that fateful conversation, Kelly Monroe was no longer Kelly Monroe, the mother who'd single-handedly raised her son in a cold, unforgiving city. She became Ellie, the new maid of the Monroe villa, but with one difference. She wasn't there to clean or cook. She was there to see the true face of the woman her son had given his heart to, Jasmine Carter. An old headscarf hid the hair Kelly once took pride in. A drab gray uniform made her blend into the background, a shadow in the very home she'd once picked out the tiles for. Jasmine swept into the house 2 days later, striding as if the villa were her personal runway. Tight dress, dark sunglasses, red lips. The scent of her expensive perfume cut through the air, drowning out the faint soap smell clinging to the new maid. Henry, true to his word, introduced her. "This is Ellie. She'll be helping around the house as we prepare for the wedding." Jasmine barely glanced at Kelly, offering a curt nod without a hint of a smile. "As long as she keeps things clean. I hate sloppiness." From that day, Kelly lived a dual existence. A mother silently watching her son, a maid ordered around like she was invisible. She cooked, cleaned, and washed Jasmine's clothes, all flawlessly. But what did she get in return? "Ellie, juice, no ice. Did you forget I don't drink it with ice? This dress is wrinkled. Learn how to iron." Jasmine didn't need a reason to scold. She snapped when displeased and ignored Kelly's quiet sorry when satisfied. Once, Kelly handed her the wrong towel. Jasmine flung it back in her face. I don't know why Henry keeps you around. A slow, annoying old hag. So ugly. Kelly clenched her fists, her cheeks flushing, but her lips stayed sealed. Because she knew someone like Jasmine would reveal her true self if you waited. Long enough, the opportunity came sooner than she expected. One late afternoon, Kelly passed the living room and overheard Jasmine's sharp voice on the phone. She paused behind the half-closed door. I can't tell him I'm pregnant. We haven't even done anything. The air grew stifling. Kelly stepped back, eyes wide. Pregnant? Jasmine's voice continued, quieter but clear. If I don't act fast, I'll lose everything. Henry's my ticket out. Then, a pause. Put what in his drink? What is it? No way, but a scoff from the other end. You don't do it, you lose him. Choose, Kelly trembled, her heart pounded. She pulled out her phone, hit record, and silently captured every venomous word. She'd been abandoned once. She wouldn't let her son fall into a trap too. That night, Henry came home late. Jasmine sauntered into the kitchen, smiling sweetly. A stark contrast to her usual sharpness. Darling, I made you some chilled apple juice. Henry took the glass, but hadn't sipped it when Ellie's voice cut through. Don't. Henry blinked, startled. Jasmine whipped around. You're the help. Shut up. Kelly stepped out from the shadows, removing her headscarf, deliberate and calm. I'm Kelly, Henry's mother, and I know what you put in that drink. The room froze. Mom? Henry gaped. Jasmine paled. She stammered. This is your mom? But why? Kelly didn't answer. She opened her phone and played the recording. Jasmine's voice hissed through the speaker like a snake slithering through dry grass. Henry's my ticket out. Put what in his drink? Choose. Henry stood speechless. Jasmine dropped to her knees. I'm sorry. I was scared of losing you. I love you, I swear. Kelly stepped forward, her gaze cold as frost. Love doesn't start with lies or end with poison. Henry stared at Jasmine, the woman he'd thought was his destiny, and for the first time he saw it clearly. Those eyes had never been for him. His voice hardened. Get out, now. That night, Kelly sat in the familiar kitchen as Henry quietly poured her a cup of tea. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The truth was loud enough. Finally, Henry murmured, I thought I was grown enough to know who's real. Kelly smiled faintly, her hand resting on his. No one's too grown to not need their mom. After Jasmine's departure, the Monroe villa fell into an eerie stillness. No more clacking high heels echoing through the halls, no more baseless demands or reprimands. But that silence wasn't peace. It was the aftershock of an earthquake in Henry's heart. He spent many nights alone, staring blankly at a glass of wine he never finished. His heart felt like a window, torn open by the wind, aching, hollow, and stripped of trust. If someone can smile while saying, "You're everything to me," then what can I believe in anymore? He'd asked his mother that question one moonless night. Kelly didn't answer right away. She simply poured him a warm cup of tea and said softly, Not everyone is like Jasmine, but you won't know who's truly sincere until you lose everything and let them see it. Henry stayed quiet, and that silence turned into a decision. A few days later, at the office, Henry called Emily Carson, his private secretary, who always handled tasks like a patient shadow, into his room. Emily entered as she always did, a pale blouse, hair neatly tied back, eyes calm yet bright. She never stood out in a crowd, but she had something undeniable, a gentleness that didn't need to perform. "You called for me, sir?" Henry studied her for a long moment, then asked, "If one day I wasn't the boss anymore, no money, no reputation, would you still talk to me like this?" Emily blinked, caught off guard, but then she smiled, her gaze unwavering. "If you're still a decent person, why wouldn't I?" Henry didn't say more, but from that day his plan to lose it all began. Within a week, rumors spread like wildfire. Henry's company was on the brink of collapse. Failed investments, partners pulling out, personal assets frozen by the bank. The press reported it. Stocks plummeted. People whispered, then turned away. Henry sent an email to all employees. "I'm sorry. The company will pause operations. You'll receive minimal support in the meantime." Emily sat silently at her screen, rereading the words. But instead of packing up and leaving, she showed up at Henry's door the next evening, carrying a bag of groceries and a pot of steaming soup. "I know you don't eat properly when you're stressed, so I cooked." Henry opened the door, seeing her in simple clothes, hair loose, eyes free of blame. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this. You could find somewhere better." Emily sat down, ladling soup into a bowl for him, her voice light as a breeze. "I didn't stay for the money. I stayed because I believe in you." Henry froze. For the first time since the betrayal, his heart stirred at words so plain. No flair, no script, just a quiet presence, at the right time from the right person. In the days that followed, Henry lived in a modest rented apartment. No butler, no car, just Emily, who kept showing up. She brought small, real things, a loaf of bread she'd baked, a scarf she'd knitted, and eyes that never changed when they looked at him, whether he was a successful CEO or a man scraping by. One evening, as Henry sorted through old documents, Emily walked in and said, "I have an idea. You could start over with a simpler tech platform. I've sketched a model if you'd like to see." Henry looked at her, a strange emotion rising. Not admiration, not gratitude, but trust, something he thought Jasmine had taken from him. He took her hand. "Why, are you still here?" Emily smiled softly, her eyes glistening. "Because I was never here for the money." A few days later, in the small kitchen, Henry sat across from his mother, recounting the entire test and every gesture Emily had made. Kelly listened quietly, then rested her hand on his. "Sometimes people come to us with glamour, only to leave in the dark. The ones who stay are the ones willing to sit with us when there's no light left to shine." Henry nodded. He knew now. He'd found a light, not dazzling, but warm, not blinding, but enough to warm his heart. That afternoon, a light rain began to fall. Not a persistent drizzle, but a fine, thread-light rain, just enough to slow people down amid life's rush. Henry stood by the window of the small apartment. Once a temporary refuge, now the place where he felt most at peace. Emily was in the kitchen, hands busy slicing fruit, softly humming an old tune. No expensive dresses, no bold lipstick, just a simple sweater and loose hair. Yet her every movement's gentle, genuine, made Henry feel like a child caught in a storm, quietly pulled under a safe awning by someone kind. He approached, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Emily flinched, then laughed softly. "You scared me." Henry didn't reply. He leaned down, whispering close to her ear. "I need to confess something." Emily paused. She turned, her eyes puzzled. "Confess what?" Henry sat down, pulling her to sit across from him. His gaze held no walls, no doubts, just raw sincerity. "I never went bankrupt. It was all a test. I staged everything to see who'd stay when there was nothing left to hold on to." Emily froze. The smile faded from her lips, replaced by a deep hurt. "You tested me?" Henry nodded. Quietly. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick. "After what Jasmine did, I lost faith. But now I know I was wrong, because you never wavered, no matter who I was, what I had, or what I lost." Emily looked away, biting her lip to hold back tears. "You know, I used to think I wasn't good enough for you to notice me, but when you came closer, I believed it could be real. Turns out I was just part of your experiment." Henry reached for her hand. "No, you weren't the test. You were the answer. The one I'd been searching for in a world full of lies. If you'll forgive me, I promise you'll never have to doubt me again." A silence hung between them. Then Emily nodded faintly, not for grand words, but because she saw true remorse in the man before her. She'd loved him for who he was, and that love was generous enough to forgive when he sought to make amends. The next evening, in the villa freshly restored after months of playing poor, Kelly sat at the dining table, arranging a few small flowers. Hearing familiar footsteps, she looked up. Henry walked in, holding Emily's hand tightly. "Mom," his voice trembled. "Tonight, I don't just want you to meet the person who stood by me in loss, but the one I want by my side for life." Emily ducked her head shyly, but Kelly stood, stepping forward to envelop her in a warm hug. "I knew you were good from the day you helped me without knowing who I was." Henry turned, opening a red velvet box in his hand. "Emily Carson, you're the one who made me believe in love again. Not because you shine, but because you're quiet. Not because you stormed in, but because you stayed when everything fell apart." He knelt. "Will you marry me?" Emily burst into tears, nodded, and threw her arms around him, as if afraid the moment might be a dream. The wedding took place in a sunlit garden, not extravagant, no media, just white daisies, a wooden guitar, and the people who truly loved each other. As Emily walked down the aisle in a simple dress she'd sewn herself, Kelly couldn't hold back her tears. She remembered the 19-year-old girl who'd left her town with a pregnant belly and a broken heart. Who could have imagined that after everything she'd witness her son grow up, love and be loved, with a love so unconditional? That night, after the reception ended, Kelly sat alone in the garden, gazing at the star-filled sky. Henry approached, gently draping a jacket over her shoulders. "Mom," he whispered, "I've found someone true, and it's all because of you." Kelly smiled, her eyes sparkling like the night stars. "Now I can rest easy. I've walked a mother's journey, raising you with love, protecting you with instinct, and letting you go with all my faith." Henry hugged her close, and in that moment they knew, though the past had held many tears, this ending was a gift well earned.